And the boat party's job is to take the scientific team down the Beschillo and down the Blue Nile or Abai. On this map here, which is the one we made after the 1968 expedition, it means coming down the Beschillo into the Abai and then down through varying degrees of difficulty. The Black Gorge is one, then a fairly easy stretch, and then the Western Cataracts, which can be very tricky if it's low water. And then on, and you come out of the mountains about here at the Dodessa Junction, and you're then into the plains which go on into the Sudan. And a lot of that does depend on the speed at which we move, and also what Sandy Reid finds in his reconnaissance over land. Because clearly we've got to find a place where we can get out. Last time we flew out from Serva using helicopters and light aircraft, and if anyone's up wandering around these hills, they may find 3 army assault boats sitting on top of a mountain because they counter-rotated under the chopper and the pilot let them go and they're sitting in it. And so one day somebody will say, my God, there must have been a flood here. 3 boats sitting 1,000 feet up.
And basically, this idea of this is kind of like, it's a neo-Darwinian adventure. You know, it's the kind of trip that nobody takes anymore, the type of adventure that doesn't exist. And the potential for finding new specimens is really quite high. We have the unique opportunity to explore something that was done before back in the '68 expedition, so we'll be able to do some comparative studies and see what the human impacts have been since that time and what remaining intact forest is left. And that will help Ethiopians and people from around the world identify some places that will be useful for conservation in Ethiopia.
And so with that in mind, and our training completed in North Wales, we proceeded to Addis Ababa on our base at the Extreme Hotel.
And having flown out from Britain, we arrived in Addis Ababa, capital of Ethiopia, and moved to the Extreme Hotel, a wonderful little place where we had an excellent courtyard in which we could sort out all our belongings and stores for the forthcoming expedition.
John Blashford-Snell leading the departure of the expedition, Addis Ababa, from the eucalyptus hills surrounding it.
Ethiopia, unlike other countries on the Horn of Africa, has a very limited infrastructure, as it was never really colonized. As such, these tarmac roads that took us to our start point out north of Dessie were few and far between. The views of the Rift Valley drew our breath, and many of us were astonished by how green the countryside was all around us.
How long's the walk to Tigray from here?
Oh, a week.
A week. They got to walk for a week.
Yeah.
Wow.
They graze them, then they.
And the farmer threshing his corn. With donkeys running round in circles on top of it.
We are now on the road between Dessie and a small place called Tenta, which is very near the famous battlefield site at Magdala, where in 1868 General Sir Robert Napier came with an Anglo-Indian army, and they came across the Beschillo River down in the dip to the right, and then up to the high ground, which you can't really see from this perspective, and they fought the first battle out of view of where we are now, under the heights of Fala. The flat-top mountain that you can see is called Selassie, and it was on that Napier stood to watch the assault on the fortress, which is the whole of the left-hand end of this particular landscape. You can see the trees on the skyline. Well, that was really the centre of the fortress, and the Duke of Wellington's and various other regiments came up against this fortification and attacked actually over the walls, and 2 Victoria Crosses were won in the assault. And the Emperor Theodore was found dead just inside the walls. He'd committed suicide with a pistol that had been given to him by Queen Victoria in happier times.
We were amazed by how many mosques we saw en route. Ethiopia, which in the time of the first Blue Nile expedition was predominantly Christian, is now nearly 50% Muslim. Before we reached our start point, we visited the site for the wells we were building in conjunction with the British charity Just a Drop and Alan Rivers, a British-based businessman. Over the course of the expedition, we were involved in building 4 wells.
Lift up a bit.
Finish cut.
Taking pictures, eh?
Sorry.
Finally, we reached the start point on the Beschillo River, never navigated before. We made camp and readied ourselves for the adventures ahead. As tradition has it, John said a prayer for the safe voyage of the expedition, with the colourful Buddhist flags flapping behind him, a gift from Meg Ali to wish us well on our journey.
Once our Avon boats were loaded and the Eurocraft tug as well, we were ready to set off. We'd used Avons on the first expedition on the Blue Nile in 1968, and these, the latest versions of this famous make, were with us again. And so we were off, with Ram Seagar's reconnaissance team in their canoe, scouting ahead of us all the way.
Down the canyon. The Ethiopians watching us from every vantage.
The Beschillo proved to be exhausting in places, the shallows requiring the boats to be dragged across the riverbed until a deeper channel was found, everybody mucking in.
Looking down the Beschillo on our lunch stop. There are 3 or 4 crocodiles waiting in the water.
On one day alone, we counted more than 50 crocodiles.
Most of the local people were friendly and simply looked at our written permission. But then suddenly 2 shots were fired at Ram's Recce canoe, and we found ourselves faced by 6 bandits armed with AK-47s. Negotiation didn't work at all. So we called the Ethiopian army on the satellite phone, and they alerted the police. And these brave fellows came with Simon some 40 kilometers over the mountains at night to relieve us. And during the darkness, we watched on a night vision device and awaited our rescuers.
And now he's sat down. He seems to be lying down on the beach, just opposite our.
Simon, this is John. The police are right up on the 3, including the 2 armed men now. Over. They've made them lay down their weapons. At least one of them's laid his weapon down. I'm not sure about the other one yet, though.
In fact, John and the team were held up by bandits, shifter in Ethiopian. John managed to get hold of me that night. We were up in the hills, working with the local communities, building wells and working in the schools. Solomon and I were able to drive across country, picking up local policemen at each village we went through. By midnight we had a posse of 10 plus ourselves, and with the tracks coming to an end, we set off down the mountainside to find the team. At first light we'd arrived, guided in by John and part of the river group, walkie-talkies in hand. The police managed to arrest all the shifter without a shot being fired, and we celebrated with a bowl of porridge and coffees all round. We left 2 of the policemen with the river team for further protection, and Solomon and I had to trudge back up the mountain with the prisoners in tow, carrying all the weapons unloaded. Finally, we deposited the prisoners at Magdala police station to await their trial. Then it was back onto the river, paddling down to our science camp.
Clean out, yeah. Zero tolerance. Oh no, look who's in front, says the Ethiopians.
We're here at our first scientific stop on the Beschillo River. We plan to do 1 stop here and hopefully 5 to 6 stops on the actual Blue Nile itself. The aims of these stops are to conduct quite a variety of scientific surveys from everything from insects on up to mammals, looking at birds, reptiles, amphibians, small rodents, and mollusks and insects. And we've got partnerships developed with institutions all around the world, including Addis Ababa University and Chicago Field Museum, the New York Natural History Museum, Berkeley University.
Clive digging a pitfall trap.
We sift it through the bag that we have over here. So Ben chops it up, we clear it up, we put it in this sieve device so that all the small material goes to the bottom of the bag. Big material stays in the top.
Rodent traps, this one's actually baited with some fish bait that was caught this morning. And the idea is that different rodents eat different things, so this would be probably an insectivorous rodent.
The traps are set on a line of 5, about 5 meters apart. Setting traps, baited with a marker to relocate it. Checking the traps after being left overnight.
This one is basically 30 grams.
The river seemed calm, but looks can be deceiving. Sometimes the animals bite back.
Okay, Fiona has just been attacked by a crocodile close inshore, came up from beneath them and has taken a bite into the side of the boat. And we're now going to repair it.
Huh? Yeah, I think so.
What exactly happened?
Well, I heard Stephen say something about a crocodile, and I sort of turned round to look, and then I saw a huge disturbance of water underneath the canoe, and then there was a huge crack on the side of it, and I realised that it had struck the canoe. Oh yes, I'm sure.
A feeding frenzy. This is the junction of the Nile and the Beschillo River, and here we have these high basalt cliffs with many caves caused by erosion, and it's here that we shot past in 1968, having had our little fracas with the bandits upriver. Of course the water was much higher then, probably almost where we're standing now. Now the current is going past a chocolate covered flood moving at just over 7 kilometers an hour, and very murky. There are plenty of crocodiles here. We saw tracks of some very large ones last night, and some of the people washing spotted them in the water. But most of the time the crocs will be fairly sleepy in the early morning because they have to come out and heat their bodies up with the sun before they get very active. So we're not expecting to see many except on the sandbanks early. Later in the day then they can become quite dangerous. And yesterday of course we had this attack on the canoe, which was probably because the crocodile got surprised as the canoe went past. But we shall wait and see. And everyone's been training this morning. We're now loading the boats and preparing to come out of the Beschillo River, which we're the first people to go down in boats and into the Nile itself.
At one point we found a cow stuck in the mud. Having watched two crocs surf down the rapids, we decided to help, and with the cool hand of Darryl, our New Zealand rafting expert, we were able to free it.
Don't stand in front of it. Oh, all right. Well done, old girl. Ready?
Hey!
Well done.
Jumps back in again.
The river was getting bigger now, and the rafting team ever hungrier. It was time for a resupply.
Simon and the RSG came down to the crossing point below Meti with 19 little donkeys carrying all the stores and equipment. Unloaded, the donkeys are looking forward to getting home. It's about a 7-hour trek up a pretty steep track right up to the escarpment, and it's going to be well, certainly not easy for our people, and I imagine that the donkeys will enjoy it because they've got no loads, of course, to carry going back. And they've done a wonderful job in bringing us beer, and we're very grateful to them.
Alice and some livestock on the trek back up to the far ridge with the resupply group after the supply dropped to the river. Up in the hills, 1700 metres, teff, their staple diet, growing and being harvested by hand in small bundles with a sickle. The resupply group having lunch in the farmers' corn stacks.
We're looking back down the valley where we've just walked. We left the main river crossing. We're now climbed 950 metres, about 10 kilometres. In the background you can see one of the tributaries of the river, and we're the Blue Nile, well over there.
A small little family with their cook and animal house at the back, and all the family in the front, drying the grains on a tarpaulin, and the sleeping hut in the background. Two ladies behind with Christians.
Ethiopia has too many people for the agricultural land available for crops, and famine is a permanent threat. And wherever we went, we saw people at work on the fields, and indeed here you have the village miller at work, using very simple but effective machines. The Rotarians back in Somerset had donated funds which our dentist, Graham Catchpole, was using to buy goats. There's a saying in Ethiopia that give a woman a goat and you provide for a family. And that is indeed what Graham was doing.
Terry, somewhere. It's not a Terry. Somewhere Terry. Not a Terry. No, but we'll call it Terry anyway. Terry.
This lady has complaining of pain in her lower left quadrant. There's a wisdom tooth at the back that's a bit loose and a very decayed one in front. So I'm going to remove them both, which is pretty much the same as I did on the previous patient actually. So this is extraction number 3 and 4 on this particular occasion.
The whole village looking on. Clever village market day. Simon cheers outside the pub. Little jug of sorghum. Potatoes, lentils, all being sold on the street floor. This is at least the biggest stall with a huge selection. Greens, soaps, hand tools, forged, wools, soaps, batteries, and the watches, all of which have Osama bin Laden's face on the front. Leaving the village behind. Our Pied Pipers.
At Makinashahan, we visited the local hospital. Indeed, it was our hope to help refurbish this. It was a very basic centre, but the hygiene was appalling and there was a serious lack of maintenance. But during the expedition, our teams did our utmost to help here and put it back into good shape.
Which actually has been cleaned up quite a lot since we were here last, and the bedding looks like it's been changed, which is quite encouraging. Here we are outside the clinic, and you can see a homemade village stretcher on the floor, and they've got here HIV counselling office, HIV testing, the laboratory with a microscope in it, and they've also got a TB room down the far end.
General washing, laundry facility, often covered with old discarded needles.
We were surprised to find a parabolic solar cooker where the lady was making her tea.
Here we are in the clinic, and this is where they dispose of their needles and sharps. It's just a big pit that they obviously have a fire in every now and then. You can see that there are needles down there. This is where they dispose of all their placentas. You can probably see in the centre of this pit is a little hole. There's no fire or anything in here, it's just a pit.
This is letter.
Incinerator pit has never been used, no?
Yeah. And probably it has costed probably about 2,000 birr. More than that. And somebody has probably snatched about 1,000 out of it.
Administrator's office, with all the records. Supper at the RSG camp. A full load of onlookers. The drugstore, kept locked with a signature for several days at a time. Only one person has the key. Ivan repairing the electrical cable.
Yeah, not the best way of doing it. Not what
with masking tape.
Fortunately, needs must. Normally do with electrical cables and connections. But if we're going to get it working, you don't have any choice.
Cable previously been used and broken by being used as a washing line. Ivan has connected the generator up, starting for the first time. The delivery room now has one bulb working. So yeah, setting out to clean the dressing and injection room. Solomon first taking down the curtains.
Charles, I was just thinking that my garage is cleaner than this. Don't have this sort of thing on the floor.
Can you see all the glass bottles that are down there?
Yeah, all from underneath the cupboards.
The young boy is now learning to scrub the screens. This old man is helping clean the top of the work surfaces, knowing that at the end he'll have his teeth seen to by Graham. Washing out with Vim. And lots of cleaning up helpers helping Alice.
The RSG was tasked with refurbishing the Makani Salam clinic. We had never seen somewhere so dirty. There was a real sense of despair, Gradually things changed, and I had the opportunity of speaking with the district authorities, who were persuaded to give men and tools to help the clinic back on its feet. The facility serves 10,000 people in the community.
Graham Catchpole also provided a donkey for a local barber who had no land.
Married guy, he do not have land yet. He hasn't got share land, and the government now land stopped to be shared again because it's becoming very small.
Yes.
So the new generation has to find their own way, either resettling in another place or making small other businesses in their village where they live. So that is the option given by the government.
But this
So
donkey,
this guy has started a barber shop, and Graham gave him this donkey to support his improvement of his barbery.
This barber shop was named after the donor from Somerset. At this place, drinkable, clean water was very hard to come by, so we also put in a well.
this well does 250 families, so probably about 2,000 people. You can pump about 4,000 litres of water a day from it. Shallow well, 3 to 4 metres deep. Built in the last month, and this is part of the work we're doing.
These wells were constructed with the help of the local community and with money provided by Just a Drop and Allen Rivers. It was a fantastic project to be involved with.
Drying dung in the fields.
We also provided a computer for the local school.
And the photocopy machine is given by...
We found the generator in the school had not been serviced. The RSG set to work, and with the help of the headmaster and his staff, we created a simple service procedure for the future. I can't tell you how many generators we saw broken down because the charities that gave them did not consider the need to explain how to maintain them.
Some of the Ethiopian highlands on the way to Bahidar.
Whilst supporting the River Party and providing aid for the local communities, Simon's Reconnaissance and Support Group saw a great deal more of the country than we did back on the river.
One little isolated house on the edge of the cliff. Small troop of baboons beside the road. Buying some honey, well wrapped in 3 bags. Christian shirt cut into the rock at the top of a precipice. Overlooking huge valleys. All well cultivated. Lake Tana at Bahidar, which is the source of the Blue Nile, passes under a road bridge just going into the town. Lunch stop for the RSG, eating injera.
You want your drink?
Solomon and Alice.
Midway through the expedition, Ethiopia suffered serious civil strife, and it was decided that we should halt whilst we gauged the situation. The boats and the team were removed into the hinterland and spent 7 days awaiting news from Addis and the British Embassy as to whether to continue the expedition.
Whilst riots raged in Addis Ababa, our embassy advised that we stay off the river. So we had to bypass the challenging Black Gorge and make camp beyond it in an area known to be friendly towards the government. We were to stay there until it was considered safe to move back onto the water.
The team busied themselves working with the local community, setting up a science camp and generally resting.
Trying to get live ones like this little snake. As I spend the solar showers. Ian's young scientist who's just caught 2 frogs into a plastic bag.
Might be that one there, the grey.
It's that one there.
Grey
snake.
Grey wolf snake.
Cape wolf snake.
Cape wolf snake.
Maybe. Still looking.
Setting up the science camp.
We found a delightful campsite in the highlands to the west beside a spectacular waterfall.
We're heading off into the valley and down towards the Nile.
The wildlife was rife, and we even happened across a sleepy python as we filled our days and waited.
Oh, I get touching you.
Then there was Burns Night, an SES tradition.
Like a distant hill, your pen would help to mend a mill in time of need. Where through your pores the dews distill like amber mead. His knife this rustic labour dight, and cut you up with ready slight. Trenching your gushing entrails bright like ony ditch.
Finally we got the all clear, the boats were taken back down to the river, and we set off again for the second phase of the expedition. It was getting hotter, and the locals were ever present.
Up till now, we had not seen any evidence of the local people using boats, and then suddenly we saw a dugout canoe on the bank.
When we stopped, they would come down and trade or just watch these strange white people who had come into their land.
Little chief. 2 things.
Hold on. It's alright. Just come in.
The markings on their faces and backs were made by ash being rubbed into cuts. Quite extraordinary to see. The rapids were never too difficult, but we all enjoyed the sense of what next as we carried on down the Nile. The river was different to the one John navigated in '68, but it was flowing at a quick rate, so progress was good, and we were able to stop regularly for our science camps.
Right, hold the electric one up, that's it.
Oh, you're too close to me.
The electric.
Watch out for his tail. Very small eyes on it.
Look at John first.
Who got the shock?
You felt the shock.
Anybody with a test light?
You're going to take the hook out. Do we have a voltage meter?
Measuring the voltage.
360.
Yeah, 300 millivolts. There is local who scours our garbage bag for tins. Look on.
Much faster now.
There was always time for a little play, and on this occasion we managed to construct our very own rapid, with Holly Tet of the British Embassy leading the charge.
In the area known as the Western Cataracts, the reconnaissance and support group came down from the highlands again, bringing with them supplies for the boat party. Our Eurocraft inflatable tug, as we called it, proved invaluable for ferrying these across to the campsite.
Arriving at our side. Welcome by John.
Got it!
Well done.
We've spent 3 days trying to catch this black and white butterfly, which we've now got. So we're just carefully putting the wings together, squeezing its thorax.
There it is.
Picking it carefully up with the tweezers. It's in the bag.
The plant community is analyzed by just taking the data of the plants, herbs, trees, and so on. And therefore there is a good food relationships between the animals and the plants. And here we can find kudus, maybe some carnivorous animals, Columbus monkey, baboons, so and so forth. This indicates that this plant, this area, is not more intervened or disturbed by human activities.
In fact, we spent the next 7 days on our own, not sighting a single local as we headed towards the Sudanese border. The river was getting incredibly deep, and Sir Charles Blois recorded depths of over 100 feet as we rafted on down the Nile. Clean water was always at a premium, and in between the rapids the team spent time looking out for the tributaries with their clear blue streams.
We passed through narrow rocky outcrops, where the river was at times only 15 metres wide. One was named in honour of Colonel Sanford, who had helped to bring Haile Selassie, Emperor of Ethiopia, back to the country in World War II. And indeed also in honour of Elodie Sanford, one of our society's leading supporters.
At the same time, we were ever prepared for the intrusion of hippo. John had a loud hailer to scare them away, but as they dipped below the surface, we all held our breath, wondering where they'd gone. The trick was never to get between a mother and her children. We finally reached what John christened the Avon Narrows, an area he'd scouted in 1968, but which they passed over owing to the high water. For us it was a gentle paddle, the Nile deep below us, with huge rocks on either side of us. It certainly would have been a very different challenge in the rainy season.
Sanford and Sheba. We're now by the Dessa Junction, but over on the far bank, small crocodile lying in the sun.
Powered by the excellent Mariner outboards, our inflatable tug was used to deploy exploration teams up and down the river. This island had been one of our bases in 1968, and now we named it in honor of Ambassador Edikho Tung, one of the vice presidents of our society.
The plan was to go to the village to make contact with the chief who John had met some 37 years before. John was intrigued by this because the man had 5 wives and he wanted to see if any of them were still alive. We'd all taken water. I'd taken something like 3 litres of water and had been constantly taking it whilst we were moving on. But even by 11 o'clock I knew that actually I was probably going to be in quite a lot of trouble getting back. Anyway, within about half an hour of moving back from lunch, I realised that I was actually in quite a lot of serious trouble. Whilst I was out, and I understand I was probably out for about, or not totally compos mentis for about an hour at this stage, Darrell had raised the alarm. Simon had been summoned, and they'd managed to find us in the middle of the jungle. We had got GPS, but it was still pretty thick and quite difficult.
So Ben and I just filled a couple of camel bags, jumped into the boat, and at that stage we thought they were only about 200 metres directly across the island from where we are now. So we raced across, jumped out of the boat, had our machetes, and started to move into their position. We had a GPS with us, they'd given us their bearing, but it quickly became apparent that actually they were a long way further into the jungle than we imagined. Probably about nearly a kilometre, and inside the jungle behind me, it's not flat and it's not open, it's completely undulating, very dense. There's the odd hippo path you can walk down. As you do, you go off the track you want to be on. And it took us probably about 45 minutes to find Asamoah, who's the policeman who Darrell had sent out to try and meet us. We did finally meet him, but not before Demolash had fired his gun to give us a clue. And interestingly, we only just heard a muffled sound of the gun. We found Asamoah, and with his help we then got to where Alistair and Birgit and Darrell and Demolash were waiting. And it was then even more apparent that Alistair was in quite a bad way. He was lying on the ground, not really moving, nor was he saying anything. We gave him some water. He drank about 1.5 litres, virtually in one. Still didn't really talk to us. He seemed to be far away, and it was then that I spoke to John on the radio and suggested that he got 4 other guys and a boat across the water. We decided then that the best thing to do before it got dark was to pop him on the stretcher, which we did, and we then carried him out, 6 of us, 2 at the front, 2 in the middle, 2 at the back. We cut a couple of trees to create the poles for the stretcher. There were handles on it. He's bloody heavy. Sorry, Alistair. And I think it took us probably an hour and a half to walk out from the jungle back to the boat.
Anyway, so we then headed back to camp, got back down onto the beach, by which time, because of the amount of fluid that I'd taken on board, I was actually quite desperate to go to the loo. When I tried to get up off the stretcher, I wasn't able to do so, and so Simon and Ben helped me while I actually had my first pee for some time. We then came back across, and I was I was taken over to my tent where I was met by Alice, who then administered to me like an angel.
By the next day, Alistair was up and feeling better. His penance for all our troubles was a turn on water duty.
Drinking water in the Nile. Tablets in 2 packets for 20 litres.
Looks disgusting at this stage.
All the deposit settled into the bottom. Filters So the bag is the funneling of the can, which then has 2 stereotype tablets per can. We finally have drinking water.
It might be. Yeah.
The final science camp, we had a series of very exciting finds. We'd enjoyed adding Nile fish to our diet, but this time Akwak, our fishing expert, would not hand it over. He'd caught one which may be a new species.
It's similar to other catfish, and it's kind of predator. It may be a small size. It should have attained a big size. Looks more a big eye and this wide open.
Yeah, in line with the mouth too. The mouth looks a little more predatory.
More predatory, yeah.
But that skull with that shape down there, is that usual?
In the last few days we've been digging away the soil, sifting it, and finding lots more pottery and lots of carbon actually, just recently.
In the flood bank, our archaeological team made a most important discovery. They found Neolithic stone artifacts, pottery and shells, all around what appeared to be an ancient fireplace. These probably came from 2,000 to 3,000 years before Christ, and amongst them was the first corn grinder of this period ever discovered in western Ethiopia.
Great.
And so we reached our endpoint. The river team joined together, with the EP Boris engine acting as a tug. We scoured the banks and finally found our exit, but not before we saw a local boat, deep in crocodile-infested water, acting as a ferry between the banks.
This was our final camp, and now that the riots were over, our support group would drive us from here back to Addis Ababa.
The expedition was over. We'd navigated the Beschillo and found our way onto the Nile. We had numerous scientific finds under our belt. We built 4 wells, refurbished 2 clinics, and helped provide equipment for schools. We'd also made a lot of friends on the way. I think Ethiopia touched all of us, and I'm sure many of us will return again in the future.